Hello, and welcome to another week. Reminder, the work week is a fiction. Monday, doubly so. You can get rid of them if you really want to. This is Social Justice Alchemy. So last week, I ranted a little bit about astrology. This week, I want to rant about religion, because of an opinion piece by Neil Steinberg on the Chicago Sun-Times. It's been floating around the internet this week, titled, Frederick Douglass reminds us Christians supported far worse than Donald Trump. Talking about how, liberals are all shaking their hands and clutching their pearls. How could white evangelicals support the pussy grabber in chief? And yeah, I get it. Talking about how Christianity was able to support slavery and so on. One phrase in here from Frederick Douglass himself. Quote, "What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slave-holding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper." And then Steinberg goes on to say, not to single out Christianity, mind you, Jews traded in slaves and members of all faiths stray far from their supposed precepts. And Steinberg had earlier said, I should be clear, I'm not equating slavery to Donald Trump. Not saying that supporting Donald Trump is as bad as keeping slaves. What I am saying is, it's ignorant to regard a moral system that was twisted to accept whipping or raping women, then selling resulting children, your own children, into lifelong bondage, and wondering how it can be support a flyspeck of a man whose crimes dwindle into nothing by comparison. Both of those statements assert there is some sort of true Christianity that has been twisted or warped into accepting slavery, which simply ignores the fact that slavery is in the Bible, that Christians regard themselves as slaves to Christ, that holding someone else as a slave isn't really a horrible thing when it comes to Christianity. But it goes even deeper than that because it assumes that there's a true version of Christianity. This is the no true Scotsman fallacy, writ, well, it's always applied to religion. Well, no. The real religion would never do something so horrible as that. It allows believers to continually section off the bad people because they're not the real Christians, or the real Jews, real Muslims, what have you. But these religions aren't true. There's no truth in them in the first place. Religion is based in faith, not in any sort of connection to reality. And thus, religion can be shaped, molded, not warped, not twisted, not perverted, just shaped, changed, however is needed, to support whatever goals you might want. There were abolitionist Christians, there were pro-slavery Christians. And from an outside perspective, they were all Christian. Similarly, pro-abortion Christians, anti-abortion Christians, feminist Christians, misogynist Christians. You can find any brand of Christianity you want. In the modern day, almost certainly, even. Not just in antiquity. There are thousands of different kinds of Christianity. There are millions of believers. There's 1 billion believers, which means that there's 1 billion different branches of Christianity floating around out there, all with slightly different or wildly different beliefs about what God wants, what is best, what should we do. There is no true Christianity. There's no true Islam, there's no true Judaism. That's why we need to move away from any sort of faith-based system. I mean, for the lefties out there, they're probably, happily shouting about the opiate of the masses and so on. And yes, religion can be twisted to support a capitalist system just as easily as it can be shaped to support any sort of socialist system. There are socialist Christians out there. I mean, there have been for centuries, just as there are fervently capitalist Christians out there. There's no real surprise about any of that once you're willing to accept that a faith-based system will always reflect the beliefs and desires of the person espousing the system rather than some sort of external truth. So I'm not too impressed just by a reference to Frederick Douglass, especially not when it contains these statements about a true Christianity or Christianity proper. Evangelical Christians supporting Donald Trump is not surprising, because any sort of Christianity can be found to support whoever it is they like, regardless of the apparent contradictions. In the end, evangelical Christians are supporting Trump because they're racist shitbags, and so is he. That's what they want. All the other stuff is window dressing. Always has been. So anyway, enough about that. Let's go ahead and move on. Now, this next bit of news comes to us from The Hill, and it's a little bit of schadenfreude. Not very good schadenfreude, though. South Carolina manufacturer says it's closing plant over Trump tariffs. One of the largest employers in Fairfield County is closing its plant, closing its doors, which it says is because of the tariffs. More likely, it's because even though South Carolina is an anti-union state with plenty of legislation designed to favor employers, wage costs are still just a little bit too high there, and it wants to move its jobs overseas anyway. And that's a damn shame. And the news comes in the wake of plans being canceled to build 2 nuclear reactors in the area, which eliminated thousands of construction jobs. So, frankly, unsurprisingly, Republican policies are kicking Republican voters right in the teeth. God damn. Fuck it. This is not really happy news. Just exactly what you expect. Let's move on. Next up, we have a piece from The Hill. Baltimore is poised to become the first major city to ban the privatization of water. That is to say, it's going to actually put it into the city's charter. It's going to make it a point to prohibit the privatization of the city's water and sewer systems. The fact is that they would have to sell those services or contract them out or agree to sell them in the first place, but it's nice that they're putting some additional barriers in place to prevent that, because holy hell, no sort of monopolistic service like water or sewer should ever be privatized. Those things should be human rights. Full stop. I'm glad that they're taking that step. Granted, Baltimore is an incredibly blue city, and there's no way in the foreseeable future that they would do that. Although perhaps the state is also pretty heavily blue and pretty heavily gerrymandered, so it would be difficult to imagine that happening in any event. But it's always nice to see steps like this being taken to protect the people who need that protection the most. So there's a bit of happy news, and let's move on. Okay, this next story comes to us from TheRoot.com. Black man who filmed Latino workers striking is fired from his job, regrets nothing. Okay, so last week, a group of Latino construction workers walked off the shop floor in protest, and they were filmed doing so by one Antoine Dangerfield, who was just gleeful about this worker solidarity and cooperation in the face of what was basically just a bullshit racist motherfucker, a safety operator who was always hassling Latino workers. Eventually, they got fed up with him, decided not to cooperate with him or put up with his bullshit anymore, and he started trying to get them fired. So they said, you know what? Fuck it, we're leaving. So Dangerfield filmed that, put it up on Facebook, it got 1 million views, people were delighted, his commentary certainly helped, and then the company tried to pay him to take it down. He's like, yeah, I can't, it's out there, it's got 1 million views. So they fired him, along with the racist safety coordinator who was hassling the Latino workers. That's great, solidarity. Ordinarily, different racial groups, they try to drive wedges between them, but not working in this case. Not for Dangerfield. Good news, he's gotten plenty of support on the internet. He got a GoFundMe set up. He's got $30,000. He's going to be just fine. So no need to worry about him or his well-being. But it's nice to see lots of people coming forward and making sure that worker solidarity is alive and well. So another bit of good news to go through the week. Let's move on. This next story comes to us from socialistworker.org, titled When Facebook Wants to See Your Papers, by Dana Cloud. Basically, Facebook has been unhelpful when it comes to any sort of leftist activism or organizing, Namely, it took down a group that was organizing a counter-protest to a white civil rights rally in Washington, D.C., aka a white supremacist rally in Washington, D.C. that's going to be happening, as I record this, tomorrow. They said that they suspected links to Russian activists. So they just wiped out hundreds of hours of on-the-ground work. Awesome. But this sort of thing is fairly typical for the big social media groups, Twitter, Facebook, and the like. They kill lefty content or social justice content while leaving Nazis up and pro-corporate sites up for a very long time. Remember, Alex Jones has been a piece of shit for years, and only just this week got booted off of YouTube. And he's still on Twitter. Okay, that's just the way this works. I mean, some of the barriers that Facebook puts in place, like if you wanted to put some sort of ad up, then what you have to do is prove residency, including a mailing address, and you have to have a U.S. driver's license or passport, and you need to provide Facebook with the last 4 digits of a social security number. So there's the number of steps in place, ostensibly over fears about Russia hacking, Russian interference in the U.S. election, and so on. But what it really does is it fosters a system that enables wealthier clients to get through the barriers, and also enables nativist and nationalist groups much more easily. So, not really all that surprising. It's unpleasant, and this is not a new problem. It's been going back for years. Kind of a bummer. Yeah? Yeah. Let's move on. Next up, we have a bit of a callback. Once upon a time, in an earlier podcast, I'll link it in the thingy, I complained about the fact that Vasilios Pistolis, a member of the Marine Corps, had not yet been kicked out of the Marine Corps for his participation in Charlottesville. Now, he was locked up for a month, well, technically 28 days in Camp Lejeune, and was convicted at court-martial for disobeying orders and making false statements in connection with his role at Charlottesville. And they finally kicked him out. He's been drummed out of the Marine Corps. Wrote Major Brian Block in a release published in the Jacksonville Daily News in North Carolina. There is no place for racial hatred or extremism in the Marine Corps. Bigotry and racial extremism run contrary to our core values. I gotta say, that's kind of bullshit. The Corps, like every other branch, has been deeply infected by far right-wing folks. Though they very deliberately sought to infiltrate law enforcement and the military. So this isn't all that surprising. And when I say far right-wing, I'm not just talking about neo-Nazis. They have a little bit more trouble just because they're less socially acceptable. But also far right-wing Christian evangelicals, Trump's base. Christian dominionists. They have been on a tear for decades, getting as many people as they can into various branches of the military, as well as police forces and so on, in order to secure society for themselves. Not great people. And they brought with them their bigotries and so on. So, those bigotries and extremism are in the military. They might not be core values, but they're in there, and they're deeply embedded, and it's going to be very hard to get them out. But, good news, Pistolis has not only served time, but he has been kicked out of the Corps. So, that's good. Let's move on. Next up, we have a bit more news. The Daily Beast got a public opinion survey conducted by Ipsos. It shows a sharp divide, is what it does, between Democrats and Republicans regarding the view of the media. 43% of Republicans want to give Trump the power to shut down the media. And you know what? That is a big problem. Now, the majority of Americans still support journalism. They want an independent journalism in order to be able to put a check on the government. The Fourth Estate is still vital, and most Americans recognize that. But Republicans have a much dimmer view of journalists. If you have some knowledge of history, this is not at all surprising. Remember, the Republican Party is the fascist party in the United States. The fascists used to be, one of the wings of the Democrats, and the Democrats were the exact same way back in the 19th century. Always happy to build up government when they were in power, unhappy when anyone else occupied it, unhappy when anyone else tried to take power away from them. In the end, the fascists are happy with anything that serves their purpose, and they want to tear down anything that doesn't. That's why they're really so unhappy and threatened whenever anyone else gets the White House. It's not because they don't want the White House to have power, it's that they want their people to have power when their people are in the White House. When their people aren't in the White House, they still want their people to have the power. They responded the exact same way with Lincoln. Lincoln won the White House, and the fascists saw that this massive machine that they had constructed for their own use was now in the hands of a liberal, a gasp of shock and alarm. And they freaked right the fuck out. They seceded, and then they declared war. So the reason Republicans are unhappy with journalism is because journalism is an independent institution that is a check on their authority, which is why that even though they hate the media, they'll still support Fox News. Because, it's a true Scotsman thing all over again. Fox News is genuine journalism. The rest is just propaganda or some shit. Funded by Soros or the Jews or what have you. And yes, I'm being very deliberate in accusing them of anti-Semitism. These people are the child of the KKK. Hate crimes surged in the aftermath of Trump's victory in 2016. I have no doubt that anti-Semitism and racism run rampant through white evangelicals, through the Republican Party. So when they say they don't support journalism, when they say they want Trump to have the power to shut down the media, when they say they think that the media is biased and should be eliminated, I'm not surprised. And it's barely even news at this point. We need to do something to temper the power of the fascists. We need severe, serious, universal, blanket, top to bottom, left to right, all across the country, election reform. Anything that can limit the ability of these people to put fuckers in office and let them run roughshod over people's rights. We really have a lot of work to do. But before we move on, I just want to say that although the results of this poll aren't shocking to me, I'm not certain whether or not to trust it. After all, it confirms what I already believe, so I need to be skeptical. But I don't know if Ipsos is a reputable polling place. I don't know if their methods were any good. If anyone knows any more about that, I would love to hear from them. Anywho, let's go ahead and move on. And our next story gives us a reminder of both what we're fighting for and how we're fighting, and, that there's hope. A number of Muslim women are joining the wave of not cis-het white dudes running for Congress. Rashida Tlaib just won a Democratic primary in Detroit, in Michigan, I should say. She's probably going to be heading to Congress. And we also have Farouz Saad, who's in a Democratic primary in Michigan, the state's 11th district. The race is still too close. But you know what? The more not cishet white dude bros we have in Congress, the better it'll be. So long as they actually win, and so long as we maintain that momentum moving through 2018 into 2020. And so long as they're willing to change things once they get to DC. Still in all, this is good news. Let's keep that in mind moving forward. Our next story comes to us from Mother Jones. Headline, a judge just ruled that the government can't lock you up for being broke, and that a New Orleans court was ignoring defendants' financial situations before hitting them with fees. Okay, how is this still a thing? Kind of less of a thing now that a federal judge just said that you can't do it. But this goes back to just after Reconstruction. You charge someone with a crime, then hit them with fees and fines, then put them in prison in order to force them to work off the debt, right? The only difference now is that instead of selling them to slave gangs or to local plantations or down to the coal mines outside Birmingham, you just send them to one of our privatized for-profit prisons. Because, you hit them with fees and fines they can't pay, and then they get locked up. But Judge Sarah Vance ruled that the 14th Amendment prohibits jailing criminal defendants who are unable to pay court-ordered fees and fines without giving them a chance to plead poverty. So, thumbs up there, thumbs down that it was still a thing. Especially, it's not really surprising that it's, happening in New Orleans. Louisiana and Chicago pretty much always are in the race, neck and neck, who's the most corrupt in the United States. So the fact that we still have debtors' prison in the United States, not at all surprising. The fact that it's in New Orleans, even less so. But, it's less possible, so good. Good. Lots of good news this week, right? Right. Local, small, piecemeal, fight your victories, fight them everywhere, fight them always. This is a good thing. Let's move on. Okay, so this next story comes from Science Daily, which is one of the places I like to get my science news, and which I often use to provide happy news for the week. That's not what this is. This article no, stop it. Bad scientists. Okay. Headline, Laziness Helps Lead to Extinction of Homo erectus. Which is, okay, I mean, it just really calls back to the old sort of racist, pseudoscience, social Darwin kind of shit. Summary, new archaeological research has found that Homo erectus, an extinct species of primitive humans, went extinct in part because they were, quote, lazy. Okay. An archaeological excavation found that Homo erectus used, quote, least effort strategies for tool-making and collecting resources. Next paragraph, this, quote, laziness paired with an inability to adapt to a changing climate likely played a role in the species going extinct. They don't really seem to have been pushing themselves, Dr. Shipton said, Dr. Sari Shipton of the Australian National University. I don't get the sense they were explorers looking over the horizon. They don't have that same sense of wonder that we have. Okay, I mean, basically because they were using stone tools, stones that had rolled down to the bottom of the hill rather than better stones available at the top of the hill. Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm judging this too harshly. Maybe I'm not. Especially, I mean, we're talking Australia, which, like the rest of the colonized world, has a hugely problematic relationship with its indigenous peoples. It's racist as fuck. I mean, all of this just sounds like 19th century nonsense. Remember, people kind of said the same sort of shit about Neanderthal, and we know that people have Neanderthal DNA in them now. Homo erectus were people. They didn't go extinct so much, I don't think, as their population continued to evolve and change. This all just sort of reads like a just so story, like you would get out of evolutionary psychology. Just bad scientist. No, don't say shit like that. Ugh, okay. We've had so much good news, and this is kind of an story, so let's move on real quick. Alright, our next story comes out of Canada. CBC, I believe, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Title, Unprecedented. Staffers drown out reporters by clapping at Doug Ford news conference. Basically, reporters are trying to ask questions of Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and his staffers just keep on repeatedly breaking into applause in order to drown out reporters' questions. Okay, they are drowning out criticism literally through sustained false applause of the dear leader. This is fascism. It's fascism on a small scale, but it's unpleasant. Who is Doug Ford? Doug Ford is the current Premier of Ontario, has been since the end of June. He is the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, has been since mid-March of this year. Okay, what is the Progressive Conservative Party? Well, that's pretty goddamn Orwellian. It's the far-right, very conservative party, is what it is. I mean, you go on their Wikipedia page, it says it all right there. Conservatism, fiscal conservatism, social conservatism, populism. He is a small-scale Trump. He even kind of looks like Trump with shitty hair and a thumb face. And he's apparently encouraging his staffers to make sure that nobody's ever allowed to question dear leader. Fuck this guy. Fuck his staffers. Fuck this bullshit. We need to find some way to overcome this. Ontario, folks, get on that. Get on that. Right away. God, Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. I have a couple of happy stories to wrap this up, so let's get on those. Alright, our next story, our second to last story, our penultimate story from theintercept.com. How bad are things for the GOP? A Democratic House candidate just got 30,000 write-in votes in Michigan. That's pretty goddamn awesome. Okay, so Democrat Matt Morgan got kicked off the congressional ballot, leaving the Republican incumbent to run unopposed in the general election. Why'd they kick him off? Because his campaign had a P.O. box instead of a physical address. Okay, if you're not aware of this, the states are in control of elections, and they have set them up so that only the two major parties are ever likely to have any chance, and everyone in power is more or less okay with this. Matt Morgan, he was not so happy with this, so he organized a write-in campaign, got 30,000 votes, and just be aware, Trump won Michigan by 10,000 votes, so this is kind of important. Michigan is one of those swing states. It's important that we have big Democrat turnout. It's also important that we have lefty turnout. So this doesn't give Matt Morgan the congressional seat. That still needs to be decided in November. But it was more than enough to make sure that he actually got on the ballot. So, good. Hopefully they can maintain that momentum, keep spirits high, and get Jack Bergman. You know, if he's a Republican, he's still running as a Republican. That means he's still supporting Trump, and fuck that guy. So let's get Representative Jack Bergman back to his used car dealership or wherever the fuck he came from. So let's move on to our last story, another somewhat happy story, slightly different tone. And our last story, yes, from Science Daily. Mere expectation of checking work email after hours harms health of workers and families. Research shows that, quote, flexible work boundaries, unquote, often turn into, quote, work without boundaries. File under D for duh, but yeah, the fact is that it's always good to have research showing that routine capitalist practices are bad for people's mental health and that we should change the way we do things. Basically, even the expectation that you should be available just leaves people constantly under stress. Wrecks them, ruins them. People need to unwind, people need to relax, people shouldn't be working for the weekend sort of thing, even when they're not at work. So, if we had any sort of chance of getting this turned into any sort of policy at any level of government, that would be better news, but this is good. It's helpful to have this sort of information available. Just to have something, any sort of weapon we can use to defend people's rights and health. Just know that the facts are on your side when it comes to fighting against your aggressive, shitty boss. Yeah, you can turn off your email, tell your boss you said so, for health reasons. Alright. That'll do it for that story. And since I'm done with the stories, I guess that means I'm done with talking about social justice and lefty stuff for one more week. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, thumbs up, give good reviews, all the things that help me make internet friends. If you would like to talk back at me, you can go ahead and hunt down my blog, Surgoshan, Surgoshan.blogspot.com. Or you can hunt down my Social Justice Alchemy YouTube channel. Speaking of which, I am starting a sort of a book club kind of thing. I wanted to learn more about leftism, lefty thought, so I went ahead and tracked down The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin. I'm working my way through that, chapter by chapter. And that is going to be starting in September. Every Friday I'll be putting up a video. And on a lighter side, I also participate in a Dungeons & Dragons podcast with some friends, hosted by my friend Kevin. We are a group of adventurers fighting for the downtrodden, hoping to unleash an ancient evil that will destroy the world. So they say. That you can find at dungeonsanddebacles.podcast.com. Once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.